Breaking tonight, new bloodshed in a country where almost 4,500 Americans died in defense of liberty. And as a brutal al-Qaeda offshoot makes its way toward the capital of Iraq, leaving a trail of hundreds of reported beheadings and executions in its wake, our vice president spent last night schmoozing at the World Cup, and our commander-in-chief spent most of the day fundraising in New York City, including right now at an event at the home of the editor-in-chief of Vogue, Anna Wintour. Mark Thiessen wrote most of President Bush's speeches in Iraq during his time at the White House. He's a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. And listen, all politicians fundraise. They do it when times are good. They do it when times are bad. But the situation is very grave in Iraq right now, and we evacuated some 1,000, we're told, from our Baghdad embassy, which would leave about 4,000 still sitting there tonight, Mark.
Yeah, well, this is par for the course for this administration. The day after the Benghazi attacks, he went to a fundraiser in Las Vegas. And when Russia invaded Ukraine that weekend, Obama went to Key Largo on vacation and Biden went to the Virgin Islands on vacation. And now we have a situation where Iraq is imploding and the president was off in Palm Springs this weekend on vacation and Biden's in Rio. You know, when the world's on fire, these people are on spring break. Think of the signal this sends to the world about the seriousness of this country.
And incredibly, as Iraq disintegrates, we now appear to have a strategy of reaching out to Iran, Mark. So now, while we are fighting against Iran and Syria, we're going to be cooperating with them potentially in Iraq. I mean, a border apart.
Exactly. Well, I mean, this is a situation where this is what happens when America leaves a security vacuum. So the Iranians have stepped in. Iran is responsible for 1/3 of the coalition deaths, of the U.S. deaths. And of that 4,500 people you mentioned, 1/3 of those were killed by Iranian-trained and armed Shia militias, who are the Iranian regime. Just yesterday, the commander of the Iranian Quds Force, an evil figure, who was personally responsible for training the people who killed 1/3 of our men in Iraq and women in Iraq, was in Baghdad consulting with the Iraqi regime about how to fight. A month ago, the Iraqis asked us to carry out airstrikes against ISIS positions, and Obama said no. Well, apparently, according to news reports, the Syrians are carrying out airstrikes against ISIS positions. So we have our two greatest enemies in the region, Iran and Syria, are filling the security vacuum that Obama left by withdrawing from Iraq. It's unbelievable.
We have General Jack Keane coming up next. I'm going to ask him what the effect of that will be. I want to ask you, though, because now more and more we are hearing the president's defenders say, look, this was not his doing. This was President Bush's doing for starting the war in Iraq. Kirsten Powers has a column out tonight citing the Council on Foreign Relations, saying that this group, ISIS, emerged in the ashes of the U.S.-led invasion to oust Saddam Hussein. She points out he ran a secular government. Now it's mostly theocratic, and they're trying to put the blame for what we're seeing on your former boss.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. When Barack Obama came into office, he pretty much blamed George W. Bush for everything for about 4 years. But the one thing that he took credit for was Iraq. Joe Biden went out and said Iraq's going to be a great achievement of the Obama administration. That's how good things were. They weren't blaming Bush for Iraq. They were trying to take credit for the success of Iraq. That's because when they came in, Iraq was pacified. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, now ISIS, had been defeated militarily and ideologically. It had been driven out of its safe havens, and they had no control over any major territory. And the Iraqi people, the Sunni masses, had risen up against them. So they were defeated and discredited. That's what Obama inherited, and now look at the situation. This is Obama's doing. This is his mess, because he withdrew.
And yet, the president's defenders say it's really not his fault, because while he wanted to keep some troops there in Iraq, which would stabilize the region, Maliki didn't want a status of forces agreement, and therefore we had no choice but to withdraw our remaining troops.
That's flat untrue. The United States, the commander, General Austin, at the time, requested of the White House that he wanted to leave 23,000 troops in Iraq, and the White House said no, and they said we'll do 10,000, and that's what they presented to Maliki, and then the White House, over the objections of the military, drawed that down to 3,000. So Maliki is looking at giving immunity for prosecution to Americans, which is politically costly in Iraq, and he's only going to get 3,000 troops. It's not worth the political cost. The White House overruled its commanders on the ground, and unilaterally, politicians in the White House reduced the troop levels from 23,000, which is what the commanders on the ground wanted, to 3,000. So that is why there are no troops in Iraq right now, because the White House didn't listen to its commanders on the ground. If we had left 23,000 troops there, ISIS would never have been able to reconstitute itself, Iran would not have gained the influence it has, and this mess would not be happening.
You know what? We're going to have a very interesting interview tomorrow night with the former Vice President Dick Cheney, and we're going to go over some of these points when I interview him. Mark, good to see you.
Thanks, Megyn.